because they want to buy things and so on. And they cannot because it's difficult to get a visa. The visa is also very expensive. So in fact, we have now another problem with new Iron Curtain on the Schengen, I would say, area. But the question is how to solve it. It's difficult to solve the problem because if you open the border, you will have inflow of all immigrants coming from all the countries.
But you cannot open the frontiers because...
You cannot, because the Schengen...
That is your agreement with
European
the
Union, Schengen. We cannot
exactly.
open the border. Yeah. So this is... So we can imagine that this is another problem now being created. And you can now imagine that Poland...
Complicated.
Just to tell you to what extent Poland has changed, I told during our meeting with professors that in 1989, Polish exports were something like $5 billion of dollars. Today it's $200 billion of dollars. Imports were $5-6 billion of dollars 20 years ago. Now we have 250 billions of dollars. In 1990, 50% of Polish exports and imports were coming and going to Russia, Soviet Union. Now, 50% of it are going to Germany. So you see, geographical structure has changed dramatically. Yes, level of I would say standard of living has also increased very significantly. And as I told our friends, our colleagues, professors at a meeting before this lecture, this very I would say interesting similarity of transition between Poland and Chile.
Yeah.
Especially in the field of democratic changes, yes, democratic changes. But also in the field of, I would say, neoliberal changes.
And many issues are the same. For example, the pension funds system.
Absolutely.
From
you know,
Chile to
Poland even followed some experience of Chile in the field of pension system. Pension system, you're also thinking of some interesting solutions of Chile. You know, one of the biggest problems we have in countries like Poland is the problem of they have microeconomics and macroeconomics, yes. They have good preparation from economics, yes.
Not all, but
you understand very well the correlation between inflation and economic growth, yes.
Yeah.
More or less.
Everybody knows.
More or less. And development, economic development. This is very serious economic dilemma. For example, Chile, since mid-70s, put an emphasis on what? On inflation, on protecting inflation, or increasing of economic growth? What do you think? What was the main aim of Chile since mid-70s? Economic growth or to limit inflation?
The priority.
What was the priority?
Inflation. No?
Economic growth. Economic growth. Chile accepted for quite long time higher inflation, but of course they wanted to maintain high economic growth. The biggest success of Chile was that for some years, especially in, let's say, 80s, it was the period of more or less 10 years of relatively high inflation here, but also very high economic growth, some 8%. This was the period where Chile really, I would say, was most successful. In Poland, the problem is also very, I would say, obvious. But what we have now in countries of Central, I would say, in the European Union, you have two groups of countries. Okay, you have developed countries like Germany, France, Italy, which have different priorities, and you have countries like Czech Republic, Poland, Lithuania, Slovakia, and so on. These countries want to catch up the gap. So these countries want to, I would say, to have as high as possible economic growth. So these countries of, I would say, Central Europe in the European Union, they want to push as much as possible economic growth. While countries like Germany and other countries say, no, we want to have to maintain very, I would say, minimal inflation. But if you really put a brake on inflation, you also put a brake on economic growth. This is a very serious dilemma. How to proceed? Of course, if you allow bigger inflation, of course you can have hyperinflation. This is a risky business, because to some extent the inflation can be out of control, like it was in South America for many years. But the problem is, of course, that if you put a brake on inflation, you can have also a very, I would say, put a brake on economic growth. This was a famous example of Bolivia. You know, in 1980s, Bolivia, you know, it was a very famous example. There was famous in American economist Jeffrey Sachs. Was he known here? I think so also. Mm-hmm. He must have been known, because he is a famous American. Now he is working in favor of the United Nations, Jeffrey Sachs. So Jeffrey Sachs was very famous for his neoliberal, I'd say, proposal, Washington Consensus, famous mm-hmm. Washington Consensus mm-hmm. prescriptions. Mm-hmm. In Bolivia, in 1984, there was a level of inflation 19,000%. 19,000%. What was the highest inflation in Chile? 25%?
More in the 70s, more.
More, but not 19,000.
No.
Yeah. 19,000. So, but they had some economic growth at that time, 4 or 5%. So Jeffrey Sachs came with his prescription, famous Washington Consensus prescription. No, so cutting social expenditure, you know, taking control of budget. There was some, I would say, very rigid measures.
Privatization.
After 1 year, this was a big success. From 19,000, 1.5, something like this, the inflation was almost zero in Bolivia, but also economic growth was zero. So this is a big question.
Yeah.
Economic growth also zero. So you have plenty of important dilemmas in economic life, and we have this in Europe now, because you have two parts of Europe. One must develop quickly. Why is it important for these countries of Central Europe to develop quickly? Because otherwise they will still continue to supply Western Europe with qualified people. Because qualified people from these countries will go to jobs which are much better paid. So this explains to why Germany and Austria, for example, till today, they keep their labor market closed from, I say, new member countries. Because they're really afraid, because of course we have open, Dutch labor market is open, British open and so on, but very important was German market. If they open labor German market, this will be a problem, especially for, you know, at the border you see the difference, yes? Much lower level of life in Poland and much higher level of life in Germany. So you can see immediately the inflows and outflows of labor. So there are some serious dilemma. It means that Europe must really go quickly, you know, to make these differences smaller between these countries. Otherwise, there will be immigration of some people. And this is, for us, for example, we lost in recent years 2 million people who emigrated to Britain, for example. Young people. Some of them they are coming back, but today we have about 1 million, especially young, qualified people who went to Britain, because Britain opened the border.
You have the problem now? Too much people went to other European countries?
Of course, we can say that unemployment is less, but in fact, if you lose qualified people, you lose in fact, you know. Of course, it's difficult to calculate, to measure, because
you can see as many activities.
Of course, they send back money. From the balance of payment point of view, it's good, yes, because they send back money. But it's a problem from the point of view, you know, of the future of the country. You cannot just